Hi everybody, and welcome back to Gender Studies. Now Chapter 3, the rhetorical shaping of gender in competing images of women, and Chapter 4, which is the one we're going to do this week, is the rhetorical shaping of gender, the competing images of men, and are examining women's and men's groups and the individuals that have influenced the cultural view of gender and sex. Now, how we see and experience what is feminine and what is masculine, it's really changed a lot in some ways, and in other ways, not so much. In addition, we're going to review each gender's more current historical and overall influencing goals of each other. Now, just in case you need this information, I don't know how well you are familiar with the word of rhetorical. As a word, this word is expressed in terms of intended to persuade. So the rhetorical for both chapters is they're persuasive arguments. And so both chapters 3 and 4 are both using rhetorical as a means of convincing or conveying the points that support the position. So we're going to begin looking at the rhetorical or the persuasive shaping of gender using the competing images of men. Now, of the two broad groups, men and women, the men's groups have been less involved than women in the movement to change images of their gender. And it's often because they're not generally the targets of gender discrimination or disadvantage the way women are. Like women's group movements, men's groups are constantly evolving with new groups arising. There's no single agenda or viewpoint that exists unifying the men's movements. Now, some men's groups work to provide new images of masculinity and are allied, that's not a lie, allied, A-L-L-I-E-D, with feminist organizations. So they get put together and they're organized in a similar manner in terms of their ability to work together. So other groups in the men's groups work to safeguard and increase men's privilege and rejects feminism. Now, masculinity has been an increasingly popular area of study since around about the 1980s. Men have both been in support of and in opposition to women's movements, and their movements have often begun in response to women's movements, as opposed to standing alone on issues they see as being issues for them specifically. They usually are responses to women's movements. So let's get started looking at the men's efforts to define masculinity, what it is to be a man. So we're going to start with the pro-feminist men's groups. Now the first sort of genre or grouping, it's also called progressive men or male feminists. And this movement began in the 1960s as men faced the sexism presented in the new left social movement with groups like the SNCC, and that is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the SDS, which is the Students for a Democratic Society. And this is back in the 1960s. Now, some men ignored the issues. Others saw that there was merit and supported the liberal feminists' ideas of egalitarianism. Now, egalitarianism is having a balance, equal, E for equal. The alternatives would be patriarchy, male and women, or matriarchy, women, men. But egalitarian is a balanced household experience. So many of the men pro-feminists that supported the liberal feminists, they supported the idea of egalitarianism, and others embraced this redefinition of what is masculinity. And since gender is fluid, masculinity has changed over time. Today, most male feminists support ending men's violence. They support rights for the LGBTQ people and men's greater involvement with family and working for social justice. Some pro-feminist men perform the treacherous identity, which is when a man who is a member of a group challenges particular attitudes or actions that may be common and accepted among members of that group. You know, it's about criticizing a sexist joke made among the group of male friends. It's not an easy thing to do. However, the goal of the treacherous identity is first to criticize commonly accepted attitudes or actions and engage in a personal persuasive activity within those people. So it's really about bringing up the dialogue about it and finding out what we don't know and what we do know. Pro-feminists want to develop emotional capacity that society discourages in men. Your men are often forced or at least encouraged to repress emotions. The pro-feminists want to encourage men to be more sensitive, caring, open, and be able to engage in meaningful relationships with others. Just as a way of an example, my father, late in his life, after his retirement, reached out to connect in more meaningful ways with his children and more particularly his grandchildren. It was like it became okay, or a societal pressure was relieved. Permission was given to engage and care more deeply than he had in the past. So let's look at the organizations and movements supporting anti-violence and pro-feminist view. We'll start with the National Organization for Men Against Sexism. It's known as NOMAS, N-O-M-A-S, and it is a male feminists organization that sponsors workshops, speakers, and annual conferences to increase men's awareness of options for emotional expression, end men's violence, developing pro-feminist studies, and supporting education against homophobia. Now, NOMAS has four main issues, areas that they want to focus on. Recognizing and resisting masculine power and privilege, ending violence against women, ending homophobia and associated violence, and developing men's studies at universities and colleges. Now, members of NOMAS also assume a public voice on pro-feminist issues. Now there's another group, a second group, and it's called ACT UP. And it means AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. That's the ACT UP. And it was a grassroots movement that advocated for people living with HIV and AIDS. Now it fought for medical treatment and changes in social attitudes towards those impacted by HIV and AIDS. Recalling tactics of civil rights movements and radical feminists, ACT UP groups were intentionally leaderless and democratic. Although largely led by white middle-class men who worked primarily to challenge discrimination against men, women were also involved. They drew inspiration from the women's health movement and created underground networks of self-educated healthcare providers. Now, a second sort of grouping of men's groups is what is known as the men's anti-violence groups. These groups see violence against women as a men's issue, since most violence against women is enacted by men. They reason that violence against women, not just a woman's issue, as a majority of the violence against women is enacted by men, therefore prevention of violence is a men's issue. Now this is something you will be familiar with, I expect, the White Ribbon Campaign. The White Ribbon Campaign is an international organization founded in Canada in 1991. Men committed to ending violence against women, and it is the largest anti-violence group in the world. Members wear white ribbons between November 25th and December 6th as a symbol of their opposition to violence against women. The White Ribbon Campaign members present workshops within their community that demonstrate Violence, including physical violence, emotional violence, sexual harassment, and etc., is generally committed by men and encourage the men in attendance to take responsibility for stopping it by speaking out. The WRC, or the White Ribbon Campaign, emphasizes that they are not male bashers. By acknowledging the majority of men are not violent, now it's worth noting because your book has an inaccuracy in it. The actual date of the Montreal Massacre that the White Ribbon Campaign was initiated as a result of was December 6th, 1989. Your textbook says December 6, 1991. However, that date is the date that the government set as a national day of remembrance and action on violence against women. It's known as the White Ribbon Day. Okay, the White Ribbon Campaign works to support women's groups and activism. Now there's another anti-violence group, and it's called Walk a Mile in Her Shoes, and it was formed in California in 2001. It focused on men and encouraged more men to get involved in anti-violence work. This group organizes events where men wear high heels and march through local streets. This has been done in Owen Sound. It's been done all over in different parts of Canada. First you walk the walk, then you can talk the talk. Now some critics of the White Ribbon Campaign and the Walk a Mile in Her Shoes argue that it does not go far enough in its analysis of men's violence. The problem isn't a few violent men, these critics would argue, but the way in which men and masculinity are defined and formed in contemporary societies. Another anti-violence campaign is known as the Mentors in Violence Prevention, that's the MVP. And it's an educational program. It was founded by Jackson Katz that seeks to teach men about the ways in which aggression and violence are closely linked to cultural views of masculinity and are routine parts of their socialization. The MVP focuses on the role of normative masculinity and the ways in which violence has been seen as a normal part of manhood in our society. Men are influenced by other men. So the MVP program instills anti-violence attitudes in men who then teach male peers not to be violent. The program has 2 points of focus. First is to teach men that aggression and violence are closely linked to cultural views of masculinity. The second is to call attention to the role of bystanders in preventing violence. Bystander behavior refers to how those who are aware of the violence respond to it. The MVP program states men must take personal responsibility to stop violence both from being committed and by refusing to condone or allow other men's violence. Now, there's another group of men's groups. A number of the men's groups embrace what is known as the cultural ideology. Essentially, men and women are fundamentally different and should have very different roles and rights. Now, this is a departure from the the pro-feminist and anti-violence. This is a departure. These groups are called masculinists and assert men suffer from discrimination and need to reclaim their rightful status as men. They also tend to ignore or denounce gay men. Now we're now going to consider a few of these masculinist groups. The first group we'll look at is what's known as the men's rights activists. Their goal is to restore traditional roles for men and women and enjoy privilege men have historically enjoyed. Now, it's a limited size group or a type of group, but one of the more extreme men's rights groups is what's known as the free men. The free men aim to restore men's pride in being real men. For them, the primary burden of masculinity is the role of provider. They want to regain their rightful place as heads of the family but that the status should not be the breadwinner role. Men's rights groups think that discrimination against men is the greater problem than discrimination against women. They point to the military draft, shorter lifespans, or more health problems and child custody laws as their reasons for stating that. Now, another group in this same category of masculinists is the fathers' rights groups. Now, they state that courts discriminate against men by assuming that women should be the primary parents. The most high-profile fathers' right group is Fathers for, that's the number 4, Justice. And they work to initiate public dialogue around fathers' rights. They sometimes perform dramatic stunts to draw attention to this issue. Many class action suits have been filed in the United States arguing that fathers have a constitutional right to be a parent and are thus guaranteed at least 50% shared custody. Some social issues that complicate custody issues are that fathers who are not legally required child support payments and fathers who don't contact children after the divorce. Now, the next men's group that falls within this sort of same genre is what's called the mythopoetic men. Now, it was founded by an author by the name of Robert Bly, and it aims to foster men's personal growth by rediscovering the deep mystic roots of masculine thinking and feeling, and restore the spiritual and emotional and intellectual wholeness of what it is to be man. Now, the ideal masculine role exists, but only, it seems, during the ancient times and in the Middle Ages, when men were self-confident, strong, and emotionally alive and sensitive. This ideal masculine role and men's connection to their work and to the earth were disrupted during the Industrial Revolution, and that created more modernization and also brought with it feminism. Men began working outside the home. Young boys lost their fathers who could initiate them into the manhood and teach them to relate spiritually and emotionally to other men. Robert Bly, that is, he introduced a term called father hunger. And this is Bly's term to describe the grief experienced by modern men born from the yearning to be close to their own fathers and other men. Now, this movement has received praise for identifying and highlighting the anguish men may feel because of distant relationships with their own father. But it has been criticized for being unwilling to confront issues of gender inequality and for the participation in sustaining that inequality. Although this group was popular through the 1980s, through the 90s this movement has largely declined, with only a few active groups and a few new members. Another group, this is known as the Promise Keepers. It was founded by Bill McCartney and Dave Wardell. And it's based on an evangelic Christianity and preaches that men should become leaders in their families because it reflects God's view of the proper relationship between husband and wife. Men make promises to be good husbands, fathers, and members of communities. This is to build strong families and communities. It's based on Christian imperatives. Men are required to be good husbands, fathers, and members of the communities. The movement urges men to be leaders of their families and to reflect the God-given division of labor between women and men. Promise Keepers urge men to rely on other men instead of women, believing that men can hold each other accountable in ways women cannot. Promise Keepers have been criticized for their exclusion of women and their meeting and their rejection of homosexual men. Now, They have also been charged with elitism based on membership that's mostly consisted of white, middle, and upper class men. In response to these criticisms, the movement has attempted to recruit more racially diverse membership and has elected an African American president. They also have softened the rhetoric about husbands leading wives. Now, currently the movement has experienced a steep decline in membership, but it's trying to reinvigorate itself through international experience. Now, this is another more relatively recent men's group. It's called the Million More Movement, and it was founded by Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Reverend Benjamin Chavez Jr. aimed to bring black men together to pledge themselves to spiritual transformation and political action. The Million Man March was first held in 1995, and it has been an annual gathering. Now, it has been faced with criticism for encouraging black men to focus on the race of those who suffer, rather than on the rage against inequality, no matter who is the victim. They're also criticized for being anti-feminist and anti-gay. The Million More movement learned from that criticism of the Millions March. It was defined as an ongoing movement rather than an annual event, and it includes all sexes, races, and sexualities. An event called Justice or Else rally that saw Louis Farrakhan passing the torch to the new generation, which has been galvanized by Black Lives Matter and noted for its radical intersectionality. This demonstrates the fluidity of activism surrounding race, gender, and sexual orientation. Now, in more contemporary terms, contemporary men's movements, the U.S. recession in 2008 hit sectors in manufacturing and construction the hardest. The economic downturn is one of the 3 recent and large social changes that have fueled contemporary masculinist movements. The second is that the U.S. family laws have not kept pace with changing family dynamics. Also, the internet has made it possible for masculinists men to connect with one another. Younger men are redefining masculinity beyond the traditional breadwinner role. In 2012, for the first time in American history, more 18 to 34-year-old women than men say succeeding in a high-paying career is one of the most important things in life. Now, this next project, since it's a project, the Good Men's Project, it serves to start a national conversation about what it means to be a good man today. The organization's publication allows men to express themselves without fear of judgment. However, many women also read the magazine in hopes of better understanding men's lives. Reading other men's stories and thoughts can help each man formulate his own definition of what it means to be good. In 2010, the online magazine was created, featuring stories and columns that address issues that surface in men's lives: sex and relationships, sports, dads, advice. It facilitates an ongoing conversation about what masculinity does and what it might mean. A third of the readers of the Good Men's Project magazine are women who want to understand men's perspective. Well, this has been a brief, but it completes our review of the men's movements, and it's quite a range: pro-feminist to anti-feminist to pro-men. Men have had a briefer presence in the development of rhetorical arguments to support their issues. Next week, we're going to consider the rhetorical shaping of gender, competing images of women. Women, we'll see, have been making their position known since around about the 1840s. So we'll see you next week, and we'll pick up with looking at the rhetorical arguments for images of women. We'll see you next week. Bye now.